Okay, it's live on YouTube. Let me double check to make sure we're on IG real quick. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for coming to talk to me today, Dr. Amy. Listen, it is truly an honor to be able to talk to you about this amazing, best-selling, incredible book.
Aww.
And I literally started it on a Friday and I finished it by the end of the weekend because I was just like, whoa, 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 the whole time. It was so awesome. So I am so excited to have you here to talk about how trauma has anything to do with the craziness of perimenopause and explaining to us your incredible book about the biology, just not the emotionalness of trauma. So thank you so much for being here. And I'm excited to dive into this.
I'm excited. Thank you. And yeah, I'm very curious to hear what you got out of the book and what pieces spoke to you. So this is exciting for me.
So first of all, let's just sort of tell us about yourself. Why did you even decide to write this book? Like, what's that, why factor behind it? Because you and I have not chatted before on any podcasts or any live. So someone might be like, who is this person? What is going on?
Yes. Well, we had the privilege of meeting finally. I want to say finally, because we should have probably met years ago. And we met in, June, July in Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
And we really resonated with kind of what we are each doing, because we're both looking at the root cause of symptoms. And so as a physician, as I was seeing my patients, I started seeing the root cause being this stored trauma in the body. And the reason why I saw that is because I had become a foster parent and then adopted. And so I was in the thick of attachment and healing and trauma and realizing the impact that it has on a person's whole being, including their body, not just their mind, but their body, and these responses that they don't want to be doing, but find their body doing. And to then start seeing that so many of my patients, especially those with any form of chronic symptoms, they were expressing some of the same insecurities, some of the same fears, some of the same attachment wounds that I was working with in my son, as well as then seeing in myself. So it was just this eye-opening experience for me of really being able to see how those things called adverse childhood experiences actually are just the surface level. There is so many other experiences that we can have that we wouldn't call trauma, but actually create a biology of trauma. And without knowing that, we're stuck with just the tools that we have known to use, and it's not going to be adequate to get to the root of the disease process and being able to really then change our life to be healthy and whole.
Yeah. And you say this so many times in the book about the concept of this, instead of thinking of an emotional response, but a biological response. And I wanted to first start out, in 2019, there was an article in JAMA that talked about women who have adverse childhood events or traumas in the past have worse perimenopause and menopause transition. And I know that from seeing patients, right? I see patients who are like, okay, I'm dialed in on nutrition. I'm dialed in on sleep. I'm dialed in on hormones, but I can't lose weight. And I have literally I've used microdosing of GLPs to lower inflammation, but that's a whole different category of medication. But if we talk about have I addressed it as a physician, the trauma that they've had? No. And that's what I thought was so, for me, mind-blowing in your book, this concept of understanding what is biological trauma? How does it affect our biology? I mean, we think of it in medicine as a mental health thing. It's your brain putting tricks on you, right? But you're literally in this book saying, no, it's literally down to your cell level. This is what happened to you. So I'd love for you to kind of connect those dots for people to go, I didn't even know trauma was in my body biologically.
Yes. And this is, I think, the understanding that everyone has had, which is why when we realize, okay, I want to do some trauma work, we naturally assume I need to go see a therapist then, which is true. And right, that's going to be a big part of the conversation today is yes. And so in chapter 1 of the book, I lay out, these are the steps, the 5 steps that the body takes to go into a trauma response. One of the most common questions that I get is it different for different types of trauma? And the answer is the body has its survival mechanisms. And so it's the same survival mechanism once we reach different levels of danger. And I go into that in all of section 1. What is the difference between stress and trauma? But these are the instinctual steps that the body will go through and the changes in our physiology at that time. And so then I show that those changes in our physiology are what keep us alive. And in order to keep us alive, it has to change our metabolism. It has to change our hormones. It has to change our cardiovascular system. It's a whole body response that's shifting us from this operating state to this one in order to survive. I think of it like driving a car. And when you're driving in first gear, the whole car is in first gear. The tires are moving at the speed of first gear, your transmission, your engine, like everything is in first gear. You can't have the tires in first gear, but the engine in 5th gear. And so that's how it is with our body. Our body says, when I'm in a survival mode, I'm all in. And thus, from the system level to the cellular level, it's all going to be responding to that survival messages coming from, especially from our vagus nerve, that tell us that this is a moment in which we are actually powerless and we should freeze and shut down in order to survive. And that freezing and that shutdown is happening at the cellular level, not just at the mental or emotional level.
Yeah, I think people recognize the concept, like if I was stranded in Joshua Tree and I don't have any water for 2 days, like it's a survival, right? A physical, and your body goes through those physical changes. But I don't think women often connect that can happen with a trauma event too, like the same idea. And in order to think about that, you also have to understand that how you go through life now determines how you're going to go life in the future, right? So I love talking about midlife as an upgrade or a pivot time to change like how I'm going to age in the future. It's not about now. It's about me not breaking a hip in 20 years. It's about me chasing grandchildren. It's about me going up steps, like the centenarian Olympics, as Dr. Pita Tia likes to say. And I think that that's part of what you said in this book was how you have to recognize what happened to you to then heal to go forward. You know what I mean? And I think that for midlife women, that often comes up a lot because we all often are in this sandwich generation of taking care of aging parents and taking care of children. And like, I'm not stressed out. I'm not stressed out. So
especially when that level of stress has been our normal, we've gotten accustomed to it. So we think that that's normal. We don't realize what we put our body through. And especially we don't realize what is the difference between stress, which can grow us and can be a healthy thing, and overwhelm. And there is no growth in overwhelm, but we haven't known to use that word. So we just call it all stress, or maybe we add the term chronic stress to try to describe what we feel or what we're experiencing. But no, like internally, there is a very big difference between stress and overwhelm or trauma.
What would someone recognize as that? People sometimes have recollection of a traumatic event, right? But some women don't even really realize the kind of trauma that may have been we would consider trauma, but they may not. So how would you identify? Which is one thing I saw in your book too, about this sort of like aha for women about how do you recognize that sort of living day to day and dealing with the 19 things that are there and the this and that, and it has to be perfect, it has to be great, it has to be awesome, and everybody has to be taken care of. And maybe understanding maybe something that would have happened, a traumatic event that would be affecting your health. How could you recognize that as a patient?
There are 5 patterns. There are 5 patterns that we can use to recognize chronic trauma. So this idea that we can go through an experience, it creates a trauma response, this physiology changes that we're talking about. And then somehow that becomes chronic. And once it becomes chronic, there are patterns. Let me explain. if we were to break a leg, but we downplayed it and we're like, oh, no, I'm fine. I can keep going. There will be patterns in your walking that tell us, I think that you're actually not doing as well as you would like to think. And it actually would be so much better if we could heal that leg so that you could not only walk better, but then you could run and you could have a much better life than what you're having to do now of getting around. You're having to adapt to having this chronic broken leg.
Mm-hmm.
That's the same idea with trauma, is that it breaks something at the time. And unless we know how to reset it back to safety or heal it at that time, it then becomes this chronic thing, unresolved. And that's what causes all forms of disease, is not the healed trauma, but the unhealed trauma. Not those experiences in our past that we have resolved and processed and worked through, but the ones that we haven't resolved. The unresolved trauma is what makes these patterns become chronic. So what are the patterns? How would I recognize that you're walking around with a broken leg? One of them is this element of disconnection. When we experience powerlessness and how we survive powerlessness, it is through escaping. Now, physical escape has become impossible, which is why we are powerless. And so what do? We escape mentally.
Mm-hmm.
That is one of the ways in which we survive a trauma. So that same pattern of escaping now becomes a chronic pattern. And now I can look at myself. My goodness, I don't need to look at other people. I can look at myself and be like, Amy, what are the ways in which you find yourself still looking for an escape? Oh, well, I have looked for an escape through exercise. I've looked for escapes through work, through food, through movies, through scrolling on my phone. There are many ways in which I can look back on my life and see I have tried to find an escape from being fully present, from feeling my emotions, especially the uncomfortable ones like grief, sadness, anger. So that is one way, is looking for that pattern of disconnection. And are we finding ways to escape what feels uncomfortable? I'll just pause there because I feel like that's such a big one that before I go on to the others, I'll pause there.
Yeah, I think people can very much resonate with that concept of like, it could be even escaping with bad relationships, right? Ended up in these toxic relationships because that's what you find easy, and the harder stuff is harder to deal with. I think that goes a lot with what you talked about in the book, your capacity too, right? Your capacity to handle what you think you can handle or what you really can't handle, right? That kind of goes into that same pattern of like, everybody takes the path of least resistance and everything, and health and everything. And I think it goes along with what you said about the capacity of you to be able to change those things, or capacity that you can handle, right?
Absolutely. And when it comes to stored trauma in the body or trauma healing, it really becomes more about energy management than time management. Even though things will take us longer, if it feels harder, we won't do it, even if it would take less time. And so we will naturally gravitate towards those things that feel like they would take less energy, because one of the chronic patterns of trauma, and I covered these in chapter 9, is that sense of depletion, that background sense of everything feels hard. I have to push myself through everything. I don't feel like I have the energy, but I know that I need to do it. So I create the energy somehow with caffeine, with sugar, with drama, with exercise, whatever it is that I need. Procrastination is another big one, because when we procrastinate, we're often creating some adrenaline for ourselves when we've come down to the wire. And it's the adrenaline that gives us the energy to kind of push through that sense of depletion that we have. So a background sense of energy depletion is one of the chronic patterns to know that we have some stored unresolved trauma.
Well, that goes to why the biology happens with affecting the mitochondria, right? The mitochondria is our powerhouse for the cell, as they said in high school biology. We all had to color it green for the powerhouse, and how exactly what you connect this sort of, it is a biological cellular response that you're depleting your mitochondria of energy, you're causing oxidative stress, you're literally breaking your system down.
Which is why it can be hard to lose weight, because actually what's happening is that it's affecting our metabolism, and our whole body, our nervous system is telling our metabolism, now is not the time to be using up energy. Now is the time to be holding on to everything, holding on to those fat cells, holding on to the toxins that then also create inflammation and water retention. And it's also saying, we should only use our energy for what we absolutely have to for our survival. So is losing weight a matter of survival? No, it's a would like to, but it's not actually a survival thing. So that's not what we're going to use our energy for. And that is why so many people can find themselves doing all the right things and working so hard. And it's just like their body is resistant and stuck. And this would be why underneath they have a biology of trauma.
Yes, I actually had a wonderful patient that she was dialed in on nutrition, lifestyle, I couldn't find anything. I had a CGM with her. Like, I did everything. And she did hypnotherapy to resolve the trauma she had from losing her child of cancer. And she lost 10 pounds within like two or 3 months span, because she had so much inflammation, which we call inflammaging now, right? And that had affected her mitochondria, and she had kind of released it, for lack of a better word. And just that had sort of flipped her system back into this, oh yeah, we can start using glucose for energy. Like we can get our mitochondria powered back up, right?
Exactly. We know, we have the research that shows that when we are in an internal state of fear, danger, and one at a level that is often a life threat, which is, if I allow myself to feel the grief of losing my child to cancer, I might die just from the immensity that my own emotions are. And so we become afraid of feeling our feelings. We become afraid of getting triggered. And so we start to make our world smaller and smaller. And we're constantly in this fear and protection mode of, don't go there, don't open that Pandora's box. And that's exactly then what keeps us in the low metabolism, but also the inflammation. So this idea that we call it, psychoneuroimmunology, this fancy terminology for how everything is so connected, that when we are living in fear, anxiety, overwhelm, it is creating our biology.
Yeah, so connecting, because you said immunobiology, the one aha moment, or I had many, but one of them was about the autoimmune turn on, like the section. I mean, being a woman with Hashimoto's and all the lovely autoimmune problems, I'm like a genetic disaster when you look at my genes, like all the stuff that's going to happen to me. But I obviously with patients work on epigenetics and the concept that genes are just part of the picture. They have to be turned on. Things like we know a lot of patients understand that concept of nutrition can turn things on, right? Poor diet can make you diabetic. But trauma, this is one of the sections you did in the book about autoimmune diseases actually like being turned on from trauma. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that, because I see a lot of women in midlife who suddenly develop thyroid problems or diabetes or autoimmune issues. And they're like, why me? Like, why is this happening to me? How did I get through all these babies and all this stuff? And now here I am in this hormonal roller coaster chaos of perimenopause. And now I'm developing these autoimmune issues. So I'd love for you to say a little bit about that and how you discussed turning on this sort of autoimmune concept.
Yes. Autoimmunity is associated with this trauma response. And so what we see is that the more stored trauma we have, the more stress it causes us. Stored trauma causes stress. And our cup starts filling up of all the stress that we have. In medicine, we call this allostatic load, right? Like this idea that the body is being more and more burdened down with all of the stress that it's holding, and it crosses a line. And this is the line that I talk about in my book with makes the difference between stress and trauma is this critical line of overwhelm. And that's the tipping point for something like autoimmunity. It's the tipping point for some other epigenetic conditions as well, where it's this idea that our body is doing its best. It's holding everything together to the best of its ability. It is working with some vulnerabilities. It is working with some susceptibilities, whether that's our genetics, our environment. All of these can create vulnerabilities and susceptibilities. And so it's just that final straw that pushes it over the edge and says that stress was just too much for our capacity. But it's not that that was the actual trigger. Because we are often unaware of all that's been building underneath the surface. All that's been building underneath the surface for decades. We don't see that. All we see is that last thing. So in my book, I talk about my patient, Elena, who had a car accident and a year later was diagnosed with lupus. Same idea. Like for me, it was going through the biggest grief of my life. And 1 month later, it was, 2 months later that we discovered the autoimmunity because of the severe symptoms of fatigue that I was having. So there are these triggers for autoimmunity and for these chronic health conditions that we can look at and say, I can see it now that that was just the final eruption of, okay, this is no more what we can continue to hold together. It's like going back to the analogy of walking around with a broken leg. You can do that for a while, but then as we, are carrying this backpack and then we're going to carry that bag and now we're going to push a wheelbarrow full of all the other stuff that we're trying to hold together or hold on to from our past, it eventually becomes too much for that broken leg. And what worked before is no longer working. And that's often what happens also in menopause. What worked before to get through, to cope, is no longer working because of the internal changes that are happening. And here's what I would want women to know. The more stored trauma you have, the less able your body is to respond in a healthy way to change. Mm-hmm. And that's change of moving to a different house, or that's an internal hormone change because we're going through perimenopause. Change is change. And the more stored trauma that we have, the harder it is for our body to respond to change in a flexible, adaptable, and resilient way.
Yeah, I want to say that part again, because I think that's really, really critical. It's a lot of things that culminate together to turn on that autoimmune disease. So it's not just a terrible diet, but what we don't recognize in medicine, which you're bringing to the forefront, is the trauma aspect of this, right? It's just a bucket, right? And it gets more and more drops, and then it starts to overflow, and you end up with this autoimmune issue. And it does affect in perimenopause and menopause your other hormones, because it's a balance. It's like a symphony. They all have to play together. If the violin guy is going nuts, then we're only going to hear the violin person, as opposed to the whole thing together. So it's important that people realize it's not just one thing, trauma. It's a combination of a lot, but it also affects how then you can heal in the future. Because again, your a little bit of resilience is a lot smaller when you have this going on. So in that, if someone's listening who is in perimenopause, who's like, oh my gosh, she's like ding, 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 hitting all of my things. I know you're not, when you and I started this conversation, you said talk therapy is very important, which is important. But what would they do on top of that? How would they then sort of see the picture that maybe this is something I need to heal from as well?
Yes. And this might surprise people to hear this from a doctor. So I just want to preface that because
they're going to listen to me, which is, I'm out there too. I'm over here talking about apples for perimenopause. So I'm already on the weirdo list of doctors who talks about other things too. So
wonderful. You've warmed them up to this idea that you're going to hear something very different from me than what you will hear from any other doctor, physician. Because we are trained, right, Jen? Like we are trained to get out our pen and write a prescription.
Yep.
We're trained to have that be the solution. And that was what I did. I did that for years when I saw my patients coming in and they were obviously dealing with some emotions then I was like, you should probably go talk to someone about that. But it ain't me. I'm your physician. Go talk to someone, meaning a therapist, about that. And then it happened to me, and I became that patient. And so in 2014, when I'm now looking at chronic fatigue of unknown etiology, autoimmunity, anxiety, depression on 2 mood medications, because I've been trying to medicate it rather than feel it and get to the root of it. That was when I said, all right, well then I need to go talk to someone about this. And that's when I realized that is missing a huge piece, which is the body. And our mind can have a story of what happened or what didn't happen, but our body has a mind of its own. And I have seen this time and time again where I won't want to do something, like I won't want to eat those M&Ms when I know for sure that I'm doing it, just because I'm anxious. I'm emotionally eating and I don't want to. My brain says that is not a good idea, but my body says, to hell with you. Well, I'm doing this whether you want to or not. And my body seems to have a mind of its own. And that's exactly what happens. Our body has a memory of its own. And so there are things that our body has remembered that our mind doesn't even have that recorded as that's what happened. And so there are 3 levels that we are going to need to repair for us to fully resolve experience of the past that are making us sick today. There is going to be the mind level. And by the mind level, I am referring to the beliefs that we have about ourselves, the belief that I'm unlovable. If someone were to know the real me, they wouldn't like me. I'm not enough. I'm too much. Like all the beliefs that we hold about ourselves, we do need to work on those, but we also have this body level. And the body level is the memory of not being able to defend ourselves, not being able to speak up for ourselves. And this is where so much of our childhood actually shows up, because in our mind's view, we've moved on from our childhood. But our body says, no, I still have this muscle memory of being powerless and not being able to speak up for myself because they were my parents, or because they were my teacher, or they were my coach. They were this, and I was just the child. And those memories will need to be worked through and resolved on a body level or movement level, a felt sense level. And then we have the biology level, which is what you help them with. So what many women are missing, though, is that body level. They come to you for the medicine, they go to their therapist for the talk stuff and the beliefs about themselves, and they're missing this body level. And as a physician, I have been shocked that when I can bring in this body level, and even if that's the very first thing I do, we are experiencing faster shifts, greater shifts in their physical health, meaning their daily physical pain, their sleep issues, their GI issues, their fatigue. And I haven't even prescribed a supplement or a medication yet. I've just prescribed some what I call somatic healing self-practices. And the reason why these work so well is because it's shifting your nervous system state. And so if you're driving in 5th gear, this is you learning how to shift it down into 3rd gear. We're not running in survival mode at 5th gear. You have been able to shift that. You're not having to wait for your therapist. You're not having to wait for me. You're not having to wait for Dr. Jen. You have these somatic healing self practices that you can shift your own state when you've recognized that, oh, I've lost my sense of safety. Let me go back and find my sense of safety, my felt sense of safety. And that is not something that we can do with our mind. It's something that we need to do at the body level for it to feel safe. We don't respond to reality. We respond to our perception of reality. And that's why whatever it is that we create, it has to be the felt sense of safety that we're creating inside of ourselves.
So some people may not know what that means. So I just wanted to, if you don't mind, just sort of explain that nervous system connection, because you said, this helps control not control, but work with the nervous system. So some people may not understand that sort of, you and I know what nervous system and parasympathetic is, but can you just explain that a little bit so people understand what that means?
Yes. there are 3 states of our nervous system. You can think of it as the operating state for a computer, or the driving mode that you're in your car. And so there are these states. And when we are feeling safe, we are in a state that's called parasympathetic. And it's the state where you will be in your best health because your body is able to engage its own natural healing strategies, like your detoxification, like your metabolism being at its healthiest, your hormones are balanced at its healthiest. So that is what we want to be engaging at least a majority of the day. But then we have this stress physiology. So that's another operating state. And at this point, we're saying this is one of the survival states. There's 2 survival states. But the stress state is when we will feel like we have a problem, but we can overcome it. Going back to that idea of the capacity. We have the resources, we have the tools, we have the finances, we have the support, we have all the things that go into me feeling like there's a problem, but I can overcome it. So it's demanding something of me, but I've got energy in my bank account that I can pay that payment for overcoming that problem. And then there's the next level of danger, which is this danger or demand or problem feels so much bigger than me, I can't overcome. It feels like I can't overcome. And so that's this trauma response. And it's the 3rd state of our nervous system. And so most people are living in either the stress or the overwhelm or that trauma state. And the more trauma that we've stored from our past, the more that we're just looping between those. We're just cycling between stress and overwhelm, stress and overwhelm. We're not actually getting into that. I feel so safe that my body can just do its repair and I don't need to even focus on it. I don't have to analyze it. I don't have to control it because my body is naturally doing it when I'm in that state. And so that's where I'm saying that when we notice that we're in stress or when we're in overwhelm, having the tools to be able to do something about it in the moment is one of the best things that we can do for our body and our health, because the more time that we can get out of those survival states into that parasympathetic state, the more that we will be in our best health and our best selves.
And it's also part of the sort of plan for perimenopause. It's not just about hormone optimization, eating well, going to the gym. It's also about this making sure that we have our nervous system. I don't like the word regulated because it feels so like, like in harmony, I guess, or blended.
Yeah, it's flow. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. So, okay. So just to go back to this wonderful, wonderful book, if I am a perimenopausal woman and tell me kind of, which I am, tell me kind of when reading this, what would be the next step you would tell someone to do? Like, is it about finding the right person? Is it about understanding a little bit more about myself? Like, what is sort of the next step? And I do want you to talk about your wonderful program that you're building, which is to help women, because this is important. Because, if you got these wonderful aha moments from this book, you're going to want to work with Dr. Amy, because she's amazing.
So section 3 was where I was like, all right, I'm going to lay it out what to do, because you're right. There has not been a clear path forward. Trauma work, personal development has seemed kind of confusing, and we haven't known exactly what to do or where to start. So I lay it out, and that's why it takes up a whole section, because it's a whole healing journey, and there are phases of this journey. So I would want a person to be able to recognize what phase are they in, because they may have already done some work and they're not in phase 1 anymore. They're in phase 2, and now they know where to focus their time, their attention, their money on phase 2 skills, knowledge, and principles. There are 3 phases of the healing journey. The very first phase, like if we are just starting from scratch, what are we doing? That first phase is about creating inner safety. That's it. Creating our inner safety. It is not something that we can wait around for someone else to create for us. We have got to learn how to create our own inner safety. That also includes a biology of safety. And so when I look at creating inner safety, there will be elements of the body and that felt sense, and how do I create that felt sense? And there are exercises that I share in my book on how to create that felt sense at the body level. I'm going to need to change my self-talk, because I can't tell myself that I'm stupid and fat and ugly and a failure and feel safe at the same time. So I am going to need to work on my self-talk, which we do through different parts of us, right? Like there's a part of me that is a critic. I have an inner critic part, and I've got to work with that inner critic part. Or maybe I have a part of me that is a perfectionist. And rather than seeing that as all of me, I can see it as a part of me, so that I can work with that part and see what happened. What happened that you believe that we have to be perfect in order to be okay. And then that allows me to, again, like create some space and create some inner safety with those parts. And then we've got the biology. And so we need to look at, well, how much inflammation do I have? Or maybe do I have some nutrient deficiencies that, as long as I am running on a deficiency of magnesium, of zinc, of B6, like, of course my body's going to be in stress mode. It's running on fumes. It doesn't have what it needs. And that's decreasing my capacity, so that smaller stressors push me over the edge. That's how we can know that our biology is also part of our ceiling effect. And there's so much more that we can do to create a biology of safety rather than a biology of trauma that will help create that inner safety, as then we can progress through the other phases of the healing journey. Does that make sense?
It does. And one thing I will say to people listening is that you do stress that where you are is okay. Like where you are in that journey, it's okay. There's no, because as a perfectionist, since you just spoke directly to me, I'm like, I got to get through phase one, like now, like in the next 90 days, right? And then you sort of put all this pressure on yourself that I didn't do this, what everybody else is capable of doing. So I do want to stress that one thing that I did see over and over again: where you are is okay. It's all good. If it's 5 years, it's 5 years. It's all good. Like there's no we don't need to have comparitis, which is important. So if someone wants to work with you, where do they find you and how do they work with you?
They can find me over at biologyoftrauma.com. And in fact, I will share some of my somatic healing self-practices with them. I can share with them my 5-day nervous system reset. So if they buy the book, they can come to biologyoftrauma.com/book. And there they can click on the button that says, get my 5-day nervous system reset. And those are 5 of my favorite go-to exercises for teaching my patients. And then they can see the other resources that I have: YouTube channel, podcast, different blogs, different guides, like steps to identify and heal that stored trauma, and be able to then decide, are they ready for the deeper work? Are they ready for really changing their inner system and their inner state, so that they can create a better tomorrow for themselves and have it be their default, right? Like not something that they're having to use so much energy because they're going against what's in their body, but actually befriending and aligning with their body as they start to create inner safety and support and expansion for a truly a better life ahead than what we've had.
Amazing, amazing resource. And I'm sure everyone will check it out. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me today about this amazing book. You guys should definitely get The Biology of Trauma, a bestseller, and start this sort of discovery process to understand how this is not just about emotional health, but about biological health as well. So thank you so much. And I'll end our live, but you and I can chat a little bit longer if that's okay.
Yes. And thank you for what you do. Like, you have been such a help for so many people, a leader in the space. So just publicly, I want to acknowledge and thank you for what you do.
Thank you. That is very sweet.